Hi, I'm Gabriela Houston. I'm a Polish, UK-based artist and author of Slavic-inspired novels for adults and children. Welcome to my channel where we discuss storytelling in all its forms. It's my belief that storytelling is an intrinsic part of everyone's life, as well as an important part of many professions. On the show, I talk to writers, artists, journalists, researchers, and more about how they use storytelling in their jobs and life. So today's guest is my friend Sophia Vahdati. She is a British Iranian author who writes genre bending speculative fiction inspired by her cultural heritage and deep love for poetry. She was also a contributor on a recently crowdfunded project, Whispers in the Earth. She wrote a beautiful Persian mythology inspired short story there. And her YA debut novel, The Girl with the Fierce Eyes, is coming out imminently on the 17th of July. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Sophia.
Thank you for having me, Gabriela.
So can you tell us a little bit about your debut?
Yeah, sure. So my debut, kind of the high concept is that it's set in a world where your eye color determines social class and status. And in this world, it's illegal to mix between the groups. And there is a girl who is born who is an illegal mix of two different castes who isn't supposed to exist, but she does. And it's kind of about her trying to unpack the fact her existence is illegal in this world and what it means and who she really is. But it's also, what I've done is the social class and the eye color part is kind of crosses over with race and cultural heritage, because as well as being an illegal mix of two castes, she's also kind of multiracial in this world. And she is living in a country which is kind of mainly white, where she doesn't look like other people. So she's kind of got this double identity crisis going on. And she's a 17-year-old teenager. So she's also got all of the classic teenager problems going on. Problems with parents, pushing for freedom, problems with boys. So that's the story, really. It's about her journey to self-acceptance.
I mean, you wrote it as British Iranian author who is who grew up with those kind of dual heritage as well. So how did your experience inform the writing of this character?
It informed it so much. It really kind of writing this character forced me to kind of go back to how I felt when I was maybe 14, 15, 16, and to really unpack with an adult brain of a woman who is proud of who she is now some of the behaviors that I had, some of the self-doubt I had, a lot of the time just feeling like I was made wrong for the world, feeling like, you know, not fitting into the people around me meant that there was something wrong with me. And also certain behavioral differences in the way I formed relationships with friends and what I expected from friendship, my relationship with my family. Those things were all different. And at the time, I thought I just have a weird family or I'm weird. But looking back on it and kind of talking to my cousins about things and meeting people from other cultures, I found that it's actually a really common second gen immigrant problem. You have this sense of not really belonging in either place because you may have never even been to the country where your parents were born. I hardly speak Farsi. My Farsi is terrible. And yet you've got this something inherited, which you can't really put your finger on, which without having the maturity and the experience of growing up and learning who you are, it's really hard to understand, especially when you're a teenager, because when you're a teenager, the world sucks.
I think all the emotions are heightened and the need to belong is heightened as well.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. So I would remember, I was remembering kind of one of the key things that I'll never forget is how I always felt like I was messier than the other girls because everyone had like straight hair and kind of pulled it back, and everyone would look really tidy all the time. And my hair, look at my hair. My hair, over the years, I've learned how to slightly tame it, but I could never kind of look neat in that way. And then it was just also things about, I don't know, just like makeup not looking the same on me, knowing that I wasn't looking the same as the other girls. Because I'm sure you remember, it's that teenage girls, sometimes you can end up being carbon copies of one another, the way you do your makeup, the way you dress. And I just didn't kind of fit in to that mold. So looking back on it, a lot of the problems I had at school and growing up, a lot of it was not having this strong sense of identity, or really knowing not just who I was, but how I'm a combination of things, and that's okay. You know, I'm not just second gen immigrant. I'm not just a British woman. And then adding into that kind of melee is that my mum's family and my dad's family come from completely different backgrounds in terms of social class as well as culture. So obviously I took a lot of that into Jansia, my main character. My mum's family are from a working class background. My granddad was from a family of miners in Wales. My grandma has river gypsy heritage. And my dad's family were kind of semi-aristocrats when they were in Iran. So they grew up with a maid, with a swimming pool. When they came to the UK, they lost all of that and they lost access to their funds, and lived a very different life. Like my grandma had never worked a day in her life, and suddenly it was running a laundrette and then working in kind of industrial kitchens, and a huge change. And those are things you don't realize are happening when you're younger. But now I can see how it really influenced the way my families work together and the way they form expectations and social bonds. So there was a lot going on. And I've really tried to channel that into Jansia's experience, except I wrote her a happy ending.
You definitely have sort of incorporated the class elements, and it's not just in the hierarchy, but in her own sort of background. And it's really interesting in terms of, you know, when we look for our identity, we expect things to be kind of permanent, I feel. And, you know, I don't want to spoil, you know, any part of the book, but I think we're all just one conflict away from, you know, being refugees. We're just one conflict away from basically starting from zero. But it's a mindset that is very difficult to live with. And I think your characters are really kind of balancing that, like between trying to have this sense of security and belonging and finding a way to like belong, and then seeing if there can be another way. So can you like describe a little bit, like, so of course, while it's illegal for people to kind of mix between the different sort of castes in eye color castes in your book, how come there's just one? I just want you to sort of explain a bit more, like how is it justified in this world?
So in this world, eye color isn't just linked to social class, it's also the way people access magic. And I've done this, it's elemental magic, but it's done in a way that you can see certain particles and manipulate them. And I wanted to do that because I thought I really like the element of visual, like there being kind of a visual signifier and difference between people, in that these people literally see the world in different ways. And so the justification is that people were just born with different levels of power. And the caste at the top has a much stronger, potentially more violent, more expansive power. And as you kind of go down, there's 4 different castes. People's power, in theory, is less important to the world. But obviously, all of this is done from kind of the way a society would justify this is by limiting access to knowledge and giving some people the knowledge they need to kind of flourish and become powerful and really use their magic in amazing ways, while restricting the knowledge to other groups. And in, again, not wanting to spoil things, but obviously the book explores how these castes that have been set out, like this is the way the world works, this is where you slot into the world, this is how you contribute. We kind of reveal that that was actually manufactured, and it's not some biological kind of necessity or truth. It's not this biological truth. In fact, it's been manufactured to try and keep people separate and keep order.
I thought that was very skillfully done in the way that you described how people, sort of especially people on top, are clinging to their sense of privilege, and they, there's the like official justification, at the beginning maybe of creating those hierarchies, and then people elaborate on them because they're so keen to justify why they're on top. And so link it to some kind of intrinsic value, or, the like lesser value of the other people. How did you decide which eye color goes where? But I was curious about that, because you put the blue-eyed people at the bottom, which of course
I have blue eyes too.
Terribly unfair.
I have blue eyes too, Gabriela.
But it was interesting because the blue-eyed people in your world control the water element, which is essential to life. So how come they ended up at the bottom?
Well, I'm going to explore this more in the second book, but I will give you a bit of a preview of there's two things here. One of them is I wanted to kind of do a noughts and crosses, turning the world on its head, which I've also done with the race aspect in the novel, where in terms of the races, the kind of Northern European coded country tried to conquer the rest of the countries and imperial ambitions and failed. And actually the country, which is sort of Persian coded, won the war and established its own empire. So part of it is an exploration of what would have happened if colonization didn't play out the way we know it in our world. What would the system be like? And then with the eye color, again, obviously there's a lot of historical precedents of a superiority of a certain way of looking, and one of those is blue eyes. And again, I wanted to turn that on its head. And so that's the first thing, was wanting to switch things up. I love Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman, and I think that her books did this so well, and it challenges your prejudices sometimes when you completely subvert a hierarchy, which we see in our real world, in a fantasy world. Then the second thing was that it is because water is so key to life that this group have to be controlled. I don't know if you've seen or Silo or read I think the story is called, it's The Wool, I think it's called, and it's a series of sci-fi novels. And in this, people are stuck in this bunker, and they're on different levels of the bunker, and the people at the bottom are the engineers, and they work, their job is to keep the motor and the whole kind of power to the silo going, but they're also the most oppressed group. And part of the reasoning in that is because if they rebel, it's going to be hell.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. But then it would make sense to not completely disenfranchise a very powerful group.
This is the thing. It's because they're not powerful because of the restriction to knowledge. The way they are taught to use their powers makes them think that they have very limited use, that they can just kind of separate water from sewage, purify water, do kind of very basic menial tasks, do cleaning, and yeah, that's how you keep a group of people under control, not only by kind of telling everybody else that they're the bottom of the class, but also by making people grow up believing that about themselves. So that's one of the things, is that if there's been a hierarchy for so long, you yourself have this internalized sense of inferiority. And I think that's what I tried to do with some of my characters, is how can you rebel against the people when you in turn you think that you are lesser.
Yes, I mean, definitely we see that throughout the world, where the kind of legacy of colonialism, legacy of racism is, in many ways polluting different, parts of the world. We see like colorism is still such a huge issue in India and, many parts of the world. And to the point where almost nothing else matters about the looks. Like that's the first thing you look for. Or the, in East Asian countries, people prizing a more European eye shape over their own, natural features. That is such a long lasting and such a strange, it's just such a strange thing to kind of, to exist in the modern world, where we think that we're kind of past a lot of that.
Yeah, it is bizarre. And I think if you think of it, I don't know, like an alien came down to Earth and you'd be like, oh yeah, we don't like those people because their skin is a different color. It seems almost childish. But the truth is it's impacted history so much. And like you said, there's this long-lasting legacy. I actually took a flight somewhere to the Far East once, and they had whitening moisturizer in the toilets of the plane.
Yeah.
And that wasn't that long ago.
Oh, yeah. That was still like a couple years ago. I saw that as well on that.
It's crazy.
It was,
yeah.
Yeah. There's, yeah. And that sort of brings me to the hierarchy within hierarchy. That, you have obviously not just the different castes that are eye color specific, but then you have people within the castes that are either on top of their own tiny pile or at the bottom. Can you sort of get into that a little bit, how you decided to structure it?
Well, I think, again, this is kind of a world where specifically the top caste, so that is people with black eyes, they're called obsidians in the story, and they have the power to manipulate sound. And within this kind of top class group, there has to be an element of cutthroat competition in my mind, because otherwise you would just get this kind of decadence of a caste who just thinks they're on the top, that can just lie back. So they have this internal competition of, even though they are above and beyond so many other people, they don't really even think of the other castes as people in the same way. And so they have this kind of internal competition of that you could always reach higher. Ambitions. So there's one of the antagonists in my novel. He is part of an elite family, but he hasn't ever been kind of given that much responsibility. And one of his driving forces, his driving motivations, is that he wants to prove his family that he's worthy of the name. He wants to prove that he has ability that isn't just attached to his name. I think ambition is at the same time one of the most amazing things about humanity, and also the most dangerous. And really what I was doing with this was trying to explore how powerful people justify the terrible acts they do, how it can be justified to dehumanize others, but how there is this driving force and this motivation inside them, in each individual, to constantly strive for more. It's a beast that is never full, ambition, in my mind.
Yeah, for sure. I think, especially if you combine it with fear, it just becomes such a useful tool to control people, like for the people who are sort of on top of the bottom pile, especially
Mm-hmm.
when you have the blue-eyed characters who still have their little elites, and when, you know, realistically they have so little power, but because they're on top of their own little group, it becomes in their best interest to kind of maintain the status quo, I think.
And we can see that all through history as well. Is, for example, if you look at, you know, when countries have been occupied by other countries, they always have people who are oppressed. You'll always have people who choose to work with the oppressing power. You know, in France, people who worked with the Nazis. I'm sure there's lots of examples in the modern day, but we just don't hear about them. In Iran, for example, it even though there is a general limitation of freedoms, people snitch on each other to the I can't remember the name of the Islamic Republic, the Guard. I can't remember the name. But
I
it's
mean, for
yeah, it's
sure, like you have like different, you know, when the Americans and the Brits kind of committed like a coup d'etat in Iran as well, and basically erased their democratic sort of
yeah,
government and reestablished monarchy, which is, you know, spreading democracy throughout the world, unless it's, you know, not aligned with our economic interests. So, and they reestablished like the rule of the Shah, and there was
mm-hmm.
this incredibly you know, restrictive regime in many ways, and then you had
Yeah.
people who rose with it, and like who were like, you know, fine, I can benefit. So I think I don't think it's any particular regime. I think it's just such a universal, you know, human condition. And um I was wondering actually, like, because we were talking about like Persia specifically, and you're saying how like the Persian sort of influence on the cultures in the book. So which elements of Persian culture do you feel like do you feel like you really wanted to delve into your background, or did you kind of magpie it and like pick some shiny bits of your culture? How did you
So the first book is mainly set in Albin, which is the kind of coded Northern European country. And it's probably the place where the Persian influence has reached the least, because in the empire, this whole country is really kind of considered as lesser and backward, because as a result of them trying to conquer the other countries, there's now been kind of some punishment dealt down to them in terms of resources that they're allowed, the education that they receive. So I you'll see more in the second book, because we're going to travel to a lot of other countries, but there's not so much of Persian culture in terms of in that setting. But we do have Jansia and her mother, who have the kind of coded Persian heritage. And some of the stuff that I included there was this very high expectations of your children, which is obviously not just limited to Persians, but I mean, in Farsi, there are certain professions where when you meet someone, you will say their profession before their name, and that is doctor and engineer are the two main ones.
I think many cultures share that. It's funny. My husband noticed, you know, my friends here noticed that a lot of the Polish people I know, that when they are talking about someone, they introduce them by what they do in the profession. Oh, you know, my friend Annie, she is the president of this bank. You know, you know, it's, which is really strange culture to kind of, you know, you don't, before you even know anything about this person, like this is the most important part of the identity that's presented to the outside world. And
we have a family friend who is just known as Mr. Doctor.
Mr. Doctor.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
actually don't know his name. I don't So that's what I'm seeing.
So
People call
he is
them
not
Mr.
just Mr.
Doctor.
Doctor, he is the doctor. There's like the most doctor-esque of all doctors, basically.
Well, I mean, we even have other doctors in our family, but they kind of grew up more in the UK. But yeah, his name, everyone in the family
But that
refers to
sounds a
him as
bit
Mr. Doctor.
that sounds a little bit like Doctor Who, actually. It's
It-
just like you can just have the doctor, you know,
It's the Mr. Doctor.
Mr. Doctor.
Um, so yeah, so the kind of expectations on children, but then my favorite one was the influence of food is one of the I think it's common across whatever culture you are, especially as second gen immigrants. Food is like one of the things that draws everyone together that you can
Connects
feel,
you, yeah.
yeah, connected to your roots, especially because from in my family, my grandma's food was just legendary. I'm never going to eat food like it again. And her way of showing love was always just to create this huge feast of Persian food. So for me, and I know for lots of other people who kind of have different backgrounds, it's food is one of the big unifiers. And I've got a scene. That's why I put the scene in there. It was really important to me when Jansia bonds slightly with her mother when they're cooking and preparing food together. And I think people, perhaps someone who's just been raised in one country and doesn't have like different heritage might not understand as much about how important it is, that preparation of food and that connection with your culture.
I think food is so universal. I think it will resonate with many people. Obviously, not with everybody, but that link to like the flavors that you know, even if they're like simple things like, you know, the bread my grandma used to make, you know, but like this particular salad that you know your brother-in-law like made, or you know, like something like that. It's just there's everybody has something like it, like a flavor that they yearn for and that connects them to a memory. And actually,
Definitely.
I'm going to plug a lovely podcast, a different podcast, a lovely podcast by an American, Becky Hadid, who she runs a blog and interviews all kinds of people about. It's called A Storied Recipe. So I really recommend it to anybody who wants to discover those food links and like how it brings people together across cultures and learn some interesting recipes from around the world.
Yeah, sounds interesting.
It is really, really great. So I was wondering, like, you know, just kind of winding back, like, how did you get into writing? Did you start this book by wanting to explore your heritage? Did you want to do something else with it? Like, what was your starting point for this book?
My starting point was actually I just envisioned the character of I saw Jansia, and I also thought of her name. I saw this young girl walking towards me, and I wrote down this line, which I can't share because it is now actually a spoiler for the second book. But it was something like, you know, that her eyes looked like she'd never seen another person or she wished she'd never had to. And I just became obsessed with this character. And I thought, who is she? What does she want? And then from her, I started thinking, okay, you know, what would the world around her have to look like to have made her reach this situation where she feels completely alienated from the world around her. And that's kind of how I came up with the oculary casts, the eye color groups. And as I didn't actually, I don't remember intending to write somebody who'd had similar experiences to me or to explore that difference of culture at the beginning. I think it just actually happened in the writing process, starting to write about a teenage girl and not belonging and almost suddenly all these memories were coming up for me. And obviously, you know that the best writing is when you feel a really strong emotion yourself and you're able to put it into words. So it's almost like my emotions actually drew me to that and led me to that, rather than starting with that idea. Because I had Jansia, and then I had a question. I think with everything I write, I always need to start with a question. That I'm never going to answer because it has no definitive answer, but I use the story to explore it. And my question was, what's the limit to which you can take restrictions of your freedom before you decide to rebel and to accept the sacrifices that come with instability and not living in peace anymore? That was my question.
It's a very good question. I think it's something that historians often talk about as this kind of tipping point in history, where you have like a long period of peace always like actually brings rising inequality, and the great equalizers in human history, very sadly, always come at a time of great disasters, whether there be natural disasters or war. And that's when things kind of equalize a little bit more. And like, in the UK, we had like, World War II, and then we get the NHS, and like, in after World War One, the domestic servitude sort of class diminished because opportunities arose, and the sense of like greater security in terms of social security, pensions, things like that. So those are great equalizers. And then the longer it goes on without any sort of disaster, we're sort of, as humans, tend to stretch the inequalities a little bit more, isn't it? And then you have a tipping point again. And
that, of course, that also links a bit back to what you asked me about the groups within the castes and the hierarchy within the castes. And that is, the people who think, okay, I don't have all these freedoms, but I want to live in a world with stability and peace. I'm willing to accept the fact that I'm never going to move up a caste, but this is that, I'm going to do the best with what I have. And that involves not questioning power and, trying to get the most out of this system, even though it restricts you. So that's the question. The question is, do you prioritize your immediate welfare and that of your family and everyone you know? And at what point do you go, actually, we have to sacrifice something?
So because this is your, debut. So what was your drafting process like? And what do you feel like you've learned from the, drafting your first book?
Oh my gosh, I've learned how to write a novel. That was my
Succinct,
drafting process.
And how to be succinct in your answers. I get it. Okay.
My drafting process was so long, Gabriela. It's so painful. There have been so many different versions of this story. I didn't really outline anything, and I started writing, and then I outlined a whole story, and then I realized that it wasn't very good, and I did it again and again, and I spent around 3 years working just on Act One, which is really painful, and I got really stuck. I just kept going to the end of Act One, and I'm being like, no, this needs to change, and going all the way back to the beginning, kind of on a loop. There's a character in the Albert Camus book, La Peste, who has spent his life trying to write the perfect novel. And they meet him and he says, I've done it. And they're like, oh, what, you've written the novel? And he went, no, I found the perfect first line. And he's like spent his whole life working on the first line of his novel. And while I did more than my first line,
it
I had
felt
something
a
in
little
common with
bit,
him.
yeah.
And
now you have
then
2 months to write part 2.
yes, but I will manage that. But the big push for me, the thing that I learned is, for me, I need a community. I can't just do it as an individual. During COVID, my best friend invited me to her family writing group, writing Zoom every Saturday.
Oh,
Um, and we still go Saturday mornings. It's just me and Lulu's family.
that is fantastic. I mean,
And
yeah,
yeah. And then
it's
they
something.
gave word counts every week. And that motivated me. I was like, wow, I need to have a word count. And
Yeah, I need to add to the word count. Yeah,
yeah.
it's that's such a, you know, COVID thing, isn't it? Like the unmentionable sort of time period where we communicated across Zoom. And I remember having writing meetups with my 2 friends where we were just literally typing. We had like it's what passed. Like now we do like cafe meetups, and then we had like just like the little corner in the, you know, of the screen was devoted to having our friends' faces. That, like, you know, it's
As you were writing.
as we were writing, to give us a sense of, you know, being out in the world again, I guess.
Yeah. So community was really important for me to progress with my
Mm.
writing. Yeah. And now I have several months to do the second part, which I am strangely feeling really confident about.
I don't know why you feel strange about it. It's like, you know, once you've found your formula, that's, you know, you're unstoppable. So can you tell us something about part 2? Like
Yeah.
what
So
without, you know, spoilers for part 1, which is difficult, but
without spoilers, I'm excited because a lot of part one, kind of the setting, it was mostly just stuck in a city, and I tried to put a sort of claustrophobic feeling to the whole story, in that, you know, our characters are very trapped in their roles, and are unable to see a way out of their situation. So you've got, you know, most of the time they're stuck in this city because of the eye color. That part of the difference in cast is that there are actually paths physically on the roads, and you have to stick to if you have blue eyes, you have to stick to the path, to the blue bricks. So a lot of it was about being trapped. And it's a really cold environment as well. So a lot of kind of like, you can't relax, you're tense, which I think worked. But I'm really excited for the second novel because, again, no spoilers, but that kind of, nobody's trapped anymore. And the world is just going to get blown wide open. And as characters suddenly have this kind of like, wow, I can do all of these things. What am I going to do? We're going to physically travel to lots of different places, different countries in the empire, which means learning more about the different types of people, having some really exciting settings. Like, we're going to spend a lot of time in Shiraz City, which is it's sort of going to be like a kind of futuristic Persian mashup land, which is going to be very fun to write. And we're also going
more
to kind of,
recipes,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, more recipes, more food. No, but we'll start to see a bit more about how Persian culture in this kind of empire has affected how the other countries live, and the way they behave between each other. So I'm excited about that. And I think it will be exciting for readers too, after that kind of claustrophobic, trapped sense of the first book, to suddenly have this big sense of possibility. But of course, as we've already been saying, what happens when you reach that tipping point? It means that there are sacrifices. Yeah, there'll be a bit, you know, we'll start to see some of the effects of those sacrifices on the characters, which I'm going to find really hard to write because I really don't like hurting my characters.
You're a kinder woman than I. I
But it's
enjoy it.
necessary. But it's necessary, right? That's the
It's
story.
yeah, you have to.
You don't just decide to rebel and then suddenly it's like, yeah, now we've won.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know who it is that said that. Um, but I remember, oh, I think it was Robin Hobb. She was saying like you can't have this protection umbrella over
mm,
your characters. And as a writer, when you get really invested in character and telling their story, you have to stop yourself from putting a protective umbrella over their head. It's like it's something that I was thinking about, in the Handmaid's Tale, the TV
mhm.
series,
Yeah.
there comes a point where you know reviewers kind of uniformly start, like, as good as the series is, they kind of uniformly start almost like mocking the fact that we've had so many episodes ending with the main character just kind of looking at us very seriously at the close shot of her face, and she's just looking up, and that she is going to really kick off in the next episode or whatever. And but throughout it, we know like nothing aside from the initial trauma of what happened to her being separated from her kid, which is from the novel. Like, there's a protective umbrella. We just kind of know that like nothing bad is going to happen to her. She's the main character, which it feels really unnatural in this world in a way.
No, completely. I think it might have been Darren Shan, actually, who is one of my favorite writers from my childhood, that horror writer. Um, and he was talking about there'd been some episode, or I can't remember what it was now, some event TV of the time. And he was talking about the difference between like doing a death of a character well and doing it badly. And he said, you get to a certain period of like, you get to a certain point where your characters have nearly died so many times that it's like, well, come on. Nobody can be in that many perilous situations and come out unscathed. So I think that's what, that's really book two. A lot of it is going to be about the sacrifices that you make when you challenge power.
Yeah, keeping it real, basically, in the
Keeping it real because, again, it's the as much as this duology is my duology of hope, in spite of everything that I've just said. Like, I have this other thing I'm working on that is almost like hope is completely absent and it's completely, imagining that. Anyway, I won't get into that because it's secret still. But this is a duology of hope, and my characters, they're going to go through difficult times, but really I'm trying to understand how you can get to at least a slightly better world through conflict and rebellion.
So everyone definitely order The Girl with the Fierce Eyes. And can we see a cover up front? Because I see you locked it. It's a beautiful bright blue cover. It's really striking. Gorgeous.
Yeah, the colors are really, yeah, they're great.
Yeah. So The Girl with the Fierce Eyes. So ordered now. And thank you so much, Sophia, for coming on the show. It's great
Thank you
talking
for
to you as
having
usual.
me.
Thank you for watching the video. Click like and subscribe if you would like more. It really helps the channel. Thank you and see you next week.